proconsular authority with a one-man agenda, if you like, to promote state building within the country. Veiled threats were made against senior officials who were perceived as obstructionist. Multi-ethnic institutions were established at the state level, and with great intensive international incubation, a state court, state ministries, the state presidency, which was supposed to have 3 members, Bosniak, Croat and Serb, was forced to operate, and all these institutions were created. Rule of law for reform was pushed by international civil servants who arrived in Bosnia en masse. A huge wealth of foreign expertise, what was known by one travel commentator as the International Salariat of Bosnia and Herzegovina, appeared in the country. And I was one of the members of the Salariat. And at the same time as the High Representative was pushing reforms in the whole country, the Americans took under their wing a part of the country that nobody could agree who would get it, because it connected to otherwise discontinuous parts of Bosnian Serb territory. It was called the Brčko district, and the Americans parachuted in their own international official, also with dictatorial powers, to recreate a local multi-ethnic government. And there were no elections in the Brčko district until 2004. And every official was appointed by the American government. Every member of the legislature, every member of the government, every judge. Bosnia had an enormously complicated system of governance. I often tell people that it had 13 prime ministers, 6 presidents, 3 constitutional courts, 14 general legislatures, with various different levels of federal operation. You had municipalities, cantons, entities, which and then you have the state, and then you have the Brčko districts all amongst this, with the most delicately elaborated division of powers between these different levels to try to accommodate each ethnic group's own particular desires for autonomy or unification, as the case may be. And the problem with this system was that it created long-term political instability, because the state-building efforts being pushed by the international community in post-war Bosnia, there was no inter-ethnic consensus about their desirability. Broadly speaking, Bosniaks wanted the country to remain unitary and supported measures which achieved that result. Croats and Serbs wanted the country to dissolve and therefore resisted everything they could. At the same time, experts came in to build up courts, the legal system, rule of law, court building, legislative drafting. I used to draft laws for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Many of the country's laws were drafted by me. I don't really speak Serbo-Croat or whatever language you want to, whatever name you want to give the language spoken in Bosnia, and I'm not trained in the legal system. But many people like me were drafting laws, and they have made a permanent mark upon the legal architecture of post-war Bosnia. Great anti-corruption measures were taken to try to push good quality of government, which had really deteriorated in the course of the war, as there was intellectual flight of the country's middle classes and a new business class of corrupt businessmen, of smugglers and common criminals, if you like, emerged during the course of the war, very standard in the course of civil war, and then seized political power and conducted elite capture of the institutions afterwards. That, combined with a communist legacy, makes Bosnia and Herzegovina probably the most corrupt country in Europe, and one of the most corrupt countries in the world. All the state-building efforts, because they were essentially politically contested, because they were working within this environment in which political and legal institutions had been captured by criminals and by an elite class of businessmen, none of them ever really got any ground, because there was no domestic political consensus. We were trying to impose upon post-war Bosnia a Western political model, which the local political actors had no real interest in pursuing. The result was a mess. We didn't send people with economic expertise. We spent all our time, classic state-building mistake, we spent all our time sending out diplomats who, with great respect, don't understand the principles of economics. And we didn't work on economic reform and economic development as we did. And for that reason, Bosnia remains the second, or maybe the third, poorest country in terms of GDP per capita in Europe, behind Kosovo and Moldova. And if you compare it with its neighbours, particularly Croatia, Montenegro and Serbia, it's quite pathetic. And we've got to ask, what went wrong? The hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars that were spent in post-war Bosnia seem to have achieved very scant results. By 2004, the international community had tired of its intensive participation in the country. For those of you who are my age or older, you will remember Christian Amanpour on the television in the Bosnian War, showing us the most shocking scenes of concentration camps, murder of civilians by their neighbours. The international community had forgotten of those scenes, and the multi-ethnic state-building efforts began to peel apart. They've ultimately proved unsustainable, threatening flight of what little foreign investment there's been, and the country now faces a most uncertain future. Aid money has dried up. Foreign troops are down from their maximum of 80,000 to about 2,000, fewer than 2,000 today. The Bosnian Serbs are in open defiance of the High Representative's orders. Russian investment is coming in to support the Bosnian Serbs. Iranian and Saudi Arabian investment is coming in to support Bosnia's Muslims. There are little in the way of Western investments that might stabilise the country. The federal structure remains quite unstable after all this statecraft. I've predicted, in a somewhat notorious piece, the forthcoming independence of Republika Srpska from the rest of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is not mere fantasy. The Bosnian Serb Prime Minister has explicitly said that that's what he wants to do. He's come out and said it in the newspaper, and I think he can do it. And I don't think there's really anybody who can stop him, apart from maybe the Bosniaks, who may take up arms to prevent it. And if that happens, countries like this one, and also Austria and Germany, are going to see another influx of refugees. We've taken our eyes off the ball. The country is in serious danger of disintegrating. At best, it's going to mean a long-term diplomatic and political black hole in the map of southeastern Europe, and at worst, there's another conflict with the potential for very serious refugee crisis. We have a real problem in Bosnia, and nobody in the international community is interested in what we're doing anymore. Everything that has been done, I suggest, since December 1995, has essentially been wasted. We've gone back to the political system we were in the middle of 1996. The international community's efforts have not proven sustainable because there was no domestic traction for them. How long do I have? I'm all right for a little bit. I'm all right for a few more minutes. Okay. Okay. So this raises a few questions for us, which is the first: could a better strategy have been pursued by the international community in post-war Bosnia? Would there have been a way of better promoting economic development? And then we should ask the questions looking forward. Given where the country is now, what approach by the international community is most likely to be effective in undoing the problems the country has? And lastly, a more philosophical question, which is that can a federal approach be useful in diffusing frozen conflicts? And what does the Bosnian experience teach us about how to design a model of that kind? Now, I don't suggest there are any answers to these questions that are obvious. Some consider Bosnia's eventual collapse inevitable, and maybe the flaw lay in constitutional design, which is that we had a system which was a blueprint for secession. That was the Dayton Peace Accords, and lo and behold, the inevitable political logic of the Bosnian constitution is now taking its final course. So there are those who'd say, well, you rewrite the Dayton constitution. But of course, it's far easier said than done, because we forget just what the political situation was in Bosnia in 1995. The Americans had had to arm the Bosniaks, and there had to be a bombing of Serb positions just to persuade the Serbs to come around the table. There was no desire to give the Bosniaks an outright military victory within the country, because that would have created maybe 1 million Bosnian Serb refugees flooding into Western Europe. There was a deliberate desire to make sure nobody won the war for various reasons. And then what was created afterwards, which was a system